Okay, sorry guys. I don't know what happened with my phone. But yes, why don't we focus on our homeless population here in America? Why don't we solve that problem? Why don't we work on getting our own citizens back to work and back to life as they know it, instead of focusing on trying to save the world, to focus on other people and places first. We need to get our priorities in line. So, this Affordable Care Act 2014 was 7 years ago or so. I didn't really care too much about what was going on in politics and in my nation at that time. But the three objectives that it had, and I guess kind of still does have, is to reform the private insurance market, which I like. I think I of all people do not like paying a lot of money to go to the doctor, to be seen for 5 minutes and I'm out $200, to go and pay a fortune for medication that you may need to feel better. I do not like that. I think that it's well overpriced, and I think that something should be done for that. But the reform of the private insurance market, expanding Medicaid. Again, so this is the one I struggle with. The expanding of Medicaid is for those who are poor by our nation's standard, and who aren't working, or who can't work, or in the case of immigrants, illegal immigrants. So again, we shouldn't be giving money and benefits to illegals. If they want to come over here, they should come over here right. We shouldn't be giving money to people who are not working for sure, and who are more than capable of working. They need to provide for their family. And then we get into the tricky part, the muddy part. What about those who can't work physically or mentally? And mentally is a little gray for me, but who can't work physically? What do we do for them? Well, I don't think the answer to all life's problems is just to throw money at it. To throw money at the problem and call it fixed. That's not the answer. I think that we have, as Americans, as leadership, as government, we have given people a way out. We've given people a way out by giving them Social Security, by giving them free health care, by giving them food benefits to go grocery shopping. We have given them a way out. No one has a sense of planning anymore, of budgeting anymore. No one has a sense of retirement planning and putting away for a rainy day. No one has that sense of obligation anymore, because we have created the people to be dependent on the government, which is not where I believe I'd want our nation to be at. The only reason I see that some leader would want people to be dependent on them is because it gives them power and it gives them a sense of purpose. Well, if people aren't dependent on me, they don't need me. But if they're dependent on me, they need me. They need what I can do for them. And I think that's a horrible place to be in. And the last one was changing medical decisions. Again, just giving more options to people on what they need for themselves, for their health, etc. And the last thing we were going to look at is is infrastructure. So that was one of the these top 5 that CNN was looking at for today. But infrastructure, Biden and his administration keep throwing that term around a lot. So what is infrastructure? Well, let's break it down by basic definition. The basic physical and organizational structures and facilities, for example, buildings, roads, power supplies, needed for the operation of a society or enterprise. That seems pretty basic. That seems pretty black and white. Well, CNN, published an article, Biden faces crunch moment in his presidency. And the question I really want to ask him or Jen Psaki is, what does Biden specifically want to do about infrastructure? What are his plans? This is what CNN wrote. The Biden presidency and top Democrats suddenly face a moment of truth with an audacious nation-changing agenda imperiled by the treacherous political math of divided Washington and stiff resistance by pro-Trump Republicans. That's pretty funny, though, how you can separate the Republicans by the pro-Trump Republicans. It's either funny or sad, I'm not sure. It goes on, a crucial phase is now unfolding with President Joe Biden's plan to redefine the concept of infrastructure with huge government social spending. With huge government social spending. I don't know if you caught that. Slowed by stumbling bipartisan talks with the GOP. Well, I'm glad it's stumbling, and I'm glad there's discussion about it because, again, you can't just spend money to solve problems. It doesn't work that way. Hopes of a sweeping voting reform law to counter Republican efforts in the states to restrict access to the ballot have no clear path forward in the Senate. So I didn't get the idea that voting rights was part of infrastructure. It doesn't really make sense. Okay, so that's part of infrastructure, I guess, and according with Biden's terms. A bipartisan drive for a relatively modest tightening of background checks for some gun buyers is at risk of fizzling. Again, I didn't catch the age verifications of gun buying in the idea of infrastructure. You lost me on that one. The best chance for a headline-grabbing win may be intense talks of police reform between Republican Senate Tim Scott and 2 top Democrats. Again, so police reform is infrastructure. Okay, note that because we need to change some definitions, I guess. But hopes that a deal could happen before the anniversary of George Floyd's death this week have faded, and the president is yet to unveil expected efforts to tackle immigration reform and climate change, 2 highly divisive policy areas. So again, immigration and climate change are also part of infrastructure. Man, infrastructure is a word that contains multiple meanings. Why would we call these things infrastructure? Well, I'm assuming infrastructure sounds better. It sounds good. And unless you read things, then you're going to assume when he talks about infrastructure, he's talking about infrastructure. And he's not. And we've already seen countless times what the Democrats what they want in terms of these topics. Climate change, huge waste of money, in my opinion. Huge waste of money. There's little to no evidence, at least not enough evidence, in my opinion, to pour bukus of money into. Not there. Immigration reform, we just talked about this and what my thoughts are. I think that we need to step back and we need to close off our borders for the time being, and we get a few things in order. Police reform, no, we should not be tinkering with the police in the way the Democrats want, as far as defunding, as far as making their life harder. Are there bad cops out there? Sure, there's bad people in every different job. But you can't just treat the entire job and organization as if they're all bad. It doesn't work that way. Background checks for guns. Is that a good idea? Sure, absolutely. Age verifications, background checks, yes. If you're going to purchase something like that, you should be able to produce something like that. But it's funny how you have to have an ID to buy a gun, but you don't have to have an ID to vote. And I see it now that I think our people we vote into power are a lot more powerful than a gun I can buy. I think I'd rather reverse those. Have no ID for guns and have IDs for voting. And yes, lastly, the guns and then the voting reform and changing the way we do that. It's worked all this time, and until COVID-19 hit us and we had to change and uproot everything that we know, and now we're going to push to change it all still. Why? What's the big idea? What's the push for? What is the agenda? What's the narrative? Opposition. It's in our history. It's in our society. It's in our culture. It's even more in our culture than I think it's ever been, at least in my lifetime. Opposition to should boys play on girls' teams and vice versa? Should men marry men and women marry women? Opposition to do we keep the bar open and close the church? Opposition to do we wear a mask or do we not? Do we get vaccinated or do we not? Opposition to so many things, so many crucial topics. Do we cancel this or do we cancel that? So many oppositions. I mean, Jesus was not against opposition. He was not. I would even say that at some points, based on what I can read, he even encourages it at some points in his ministry. Mark 3 tells us this. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. So Jesus was out with his followers, and there was a man with a shriveled hand, and he wanted to be healed, obviously. And so the Pharisees, the religious leaders, were watching Jesus carefully to see what he did and what he was going to do. And Jesus continues. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." And so stand up in front of everyone. I want them all to see this. So, Jesus could have taken him to another place, a secluded place. Jesus could have been a little more quiet and secretive about it, but he didn't do that. And it goes on, then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath? Because again, these religious leaders were very, very, very hung on the law and what it said and what it stood for. And Jesus didn't oppose the law. He came to make it better, to make it new. But they couldn't get that out of their head and accept what he was doing. So Jesus said, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save a life or to kill? But they remained silent. Jesus wasn't against opposition. There's going to be opposition. There was for Jesus. If there was no opposition, then I would go on a limb here and say Jesus would never have been killed. He was killed because there was opposition. He did things that they didn't like. He did things that they disagreed with. That's why they were watching to accuse him. That's why they ultimately had him killed. They didn't like what he was doing. They opposed his ideas, his actions, his words. I want to live my life to where everything I do and say is glorifying to Him, that is praising His name. Do I just want to be a man that opposes everything and has rocks thrown at me? No, I don't. Nobody wants that. But I challenge myself and I challenge you that whenever we face times of trouble and times of decision making, which one do we go with? Do we go with the people, the majority, what they like, or do we go with God? Do we go with His decision, His will, and His word? That's what I want to do. I want to make sure I'm standing on the right side of the opposition. So, as always, I appreciate you guys watching, listening. If you haven't subscribed, do so, please, and like the video if you like what you hear. Ask me a question, leave a comment. I would love to get back with you. If you heard something I've said that you don't agree with or you think is wrong, let me know so I can step back what I've said, or so I can emphasize and double down on what I've said. I want there to be communication. If there's opposition, I want to face it. Again, I'm not opposed to it. I want to face it. So, all right, I'll talk to you guys later.